Part Two, Chapter 20 of Burning Daylight by Jack London. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. When the ferry system began to run, and the times between Oakland and San Francisco was demonstrated to be cut in half, the tide of Daylight's terrific expenditure started to turn. Not that it really did turn, for he promptly went into further investments. Thousands of lots in his residential tracts were sold, and thousands of homes were being built. Factory sites also were selling, and business properties in the heart of Oakland. All this tended to a steady appreciation in value of Daylight's huge holdings. But as of old, he had his hunch, and he was riding it. Already he had begun borrowing from the banks. The magnificent profits he made on the land he sold were turning into more land, into more development, and instead of paying off old loans, he contracted new ones. As he had pyramided in Dawson City, he was now pyramided in Oakland, but he did it with the knowledge that it was a stable enterprise rather than a risky placer mining boom. In a small way, other men were following his lead, buying and selling land and profiting by the improvement work he was doing. But this was to be expected, and the small fortunes they were making at his expense did not irritate him. There was an exception, however, one Simon Dolliver, with money to go in with, and with cunning and courage to back it up, bade fair to become a several times millionaire at Daylight's expense. Dolliver, too, pyramided, playing quickly and accurately, and keeping his money turning over and over. More than once Daylight found him in the way, as he himself had gotten in the way of the Guggenhammers when they first set their eyes on Ophir Creek. Work on Daylight's dock system went on apace, yet was one of those enterprises that consumed money dreadfully, and that could not be accomplished as quickly as a ferry system. The engineering difficulties were great, the dredging and filling a cyclopean task. The mere item of pilings was anything but small. A good average pile, by the time it was delivered on the ground, cost a $20 gold piece, and these piles were used in unending thousands. All accessible groves of mature eucalyptus were used, and as well, great rafts of pine piles were towed down the coast from Puget Sound. Not content with manufacturing the electricity for street railways in the old-fashioned way in powerhouses, Daylight organized the Sierra and Salvador Power Company. This immediately assumed large proportions. Crossing the San Joaquin Valley on the way from the mountains and plunging through the Contra Costa Hills, there were many towns and even a robust city that could be supplied with power, also with light, and it became a street and house lighting project as well. As soon as the purchase of power sites in the Sierra was rushed through, the survey parties were out and building operations begun. And so it went. There were 1,000 maws into which he poured unceasing streams of money. But it was all so sound and legitimate that Daylight, born gambler that he was, and with his clear, wide vision, could not play softly and safely. It was a big opportunity, and to him there was only one way to play it, and that was the big way. Nor did his one confidential adviser, Larry Hagan, aid him to caution. On the contrary, it was Daylight who was compelled to veto the wilder visions of that able hashish dreamer. Not only did Daylight borrow heavily from the banks and trust companies, but on several of his corporations he was compelled to issue stock. He did this grudgingly, however, and retained most of his big enterprises of his own. Among the companies in which he reluctantly allowed the investing public to join were the Golden Gate Dock Company, the Recreation Parks Company, the United Water Company, and the Uncial Shipbuilding Company, and the Sierra and Salvador Power Company. Nevertheless, between himself and Hegan, he retained the controlling share in each of these enterprises. His affair with Dede Mason only seemed to languish. While delaying to grapple with the strange problem it presented, his desire for her continued to grow. In his gambling simile, his conclusion was that luck had dealt him the most remarkable card in the deck, and that for years he had overlooked it. Love was the card, and it beat them all. Love was the king card of trumps, the fifth ace, the joker in a game of tenderfoot poker. It was the card of cards, and play it he would to the limit when the opening came. He could not see that opening yet. The present game would have to play to some sort of conclusion first. Yet he could not shake from his brain and vision the warm recollection of those bronze slippers, that clinging gown, and all the feminine softness and pliancy of Dede in her pretty Berkeley rooms. Once again on a rainy Sunday he telephoned that he was coming, and as has happened ever since man first looked upon woman and called her good, again he played the blind force of male compulsion against a woman's secret weakness to yield. Not that it was Daylight's way abjectly to beg and entreat. On the contrary, he was masterful in whatever he did, but he had a trick of whimsical wheedling that Dede found harder to resist than the pleas of a suppliant lover. It was not a happy scene in its outcome, for Dede, in the throes of her own desire, desperate with weakness, and at the same time with her better judgment hating her weakness, cried out: "You urge me to try a chance, to marry you now and trust to luck for it to come out right. And life is a gamble, say. Very well, let us gamble. Take a coin and toss it in the air. If it comes head, I'll marry you. If it doesn't, you are forever to leave me alone and never mention marriage again." A fire of mingled love and the passion of gambling came into Daylight's eyes. Involuntarily, his hand started for his pocket for the coin. Then it stopped, and the light in his eyes was troubled. "Go," she ordered sharply. "Don't delay, or I may change my mind, and you will lose the chance." Little woman. His similes were humorous, but there was no humor in their meaning. His thought was as solemn as his voice. Little woman, I'd gamble all the way from creation to the day of judgment. I'd gamble a golden harp against another man's halo. I'd toss for pennies on the front steps of the New Jerusalem, or set up a faro layout just outside the pearly gates. But I'll be everlastingly damned if I'll gamble on love. Love's too big to me to take a chance on. Love's got to be a sure thing. And between you and me, it is a sure thing. If the odds were 100 to 1 on my winning this flip, just the same, nary a flip. In the spring of that year, the great panic came on. The first warnings was when the banks began calling in their unprotected loans. Daylight promptly paid the first several of his personal notes that were presented. Then he divined that these demands but indicated the way the wind was going to blow, and that one of those terrific financial storms he had heard about was soon to sweep over the United States. How terrific this particular storm was to be, he did not anticipate. Nevertheless, he took every precaution in his power, and had no anxiety about his weathering it out. Money grew tighter, beginning with the crash of several of the greatest Eastern banking houses. The tightness spread until every bank in the country was calling in its credits. Daylight was caught, and caught because of the fact that for the first time he had been playing the legitimate business game. In the old days, such a panic, with the accompanying extreme shrinkage of values, would have been a golden harvest time for him. As it was, he watched the gamblers who had ridden the wave of prosperity and made preparations for the slump, getting out from under and safely scurrying to cover or proceeding to reap a double harvest. Nothing remained for him but to stand fast and hold up. He saw the situation clearly. When the banks demanded that he pay his loans, he knew that the banks were in sore need of the money. But he was in sorer need. And he knew that the banks did not want his collateral which they held. It would do them no good. In such a tumbling of values was no time to sell. His collateral was good, all of it, eminently sound and worthwhile, yet it was worthless at such a moment when the one unceasing cry was money, money, money. Finding him obdurate, the banks demanded more collateral, and as the money pinch tightened, they asked for 2 and even 3 times as much as had been originally accepted. Sometimes Daylight yielded to these demands, but more often not, and always battling fiercely. He fought as with clay behind a crumbling wall. All portions of the wall were menaced, and he went around constantly strengthening the weakest parts with clay. This clay was money, and was applied, a sop here and a sop there, as fast as it was needed, but only when it was directly needed. The strength of his position lay in the Yerba Buena Ferry Company, the Consolidated Street Railways, and the United Water Company. Though people were no longer buying resident lots and factory and business sites, they were compelled to ride on his cars and ferry boats and to consume his water. When all the financial world was clamoring for money and perishing through lack of it, the first of each month many thousands of dollars poured into his coffers from the water rates. And each day $10,000 in dimes and nickels came in from his street railways and ferries. Cash was what was wanted, and had he had the use of all this steady river of cash, all would have been well with him. As it was, he had to fight continually for a portion of it. Improvement work ceased, and only absolutely essential repairs were made. His fiercest fight was with the operating expenses, and this was a fight that never ended. There was never any let-up in his turning the thumbscrews of extended credit and economy. From the big wholesale suppliers down through the salary list to office stationery and postage stamps, he kept the thumbscrews turning. When his superintendents and heads of departments performed prodigies of cutting down, he patted them on the back and demanded more. When they threw down their hands in despair, he showed them how more could be accomplished. "You are getting $8,000 a year," he told Matheson. "It's better pay than you ever got in your life before. Your fortune is in the same sack with mine. You've got to stand for some of the strain and risk. You've got a personal credit in this town. Use it. Stand off butcher and baker and all the rest. Savvy? You're drawing down something like $660 a month. I want that cash. From now on, stand everybody off and draw down 100. I'll pay you interest on the rest till this blows over." 2 weeks later, with the payroll before them, it was: "Matheson, who's this bookkeeper Rogers? Your nephew? I thought so. He's pulling down 85 a month. After this, let him draw 35. That 40 can ride with me at interest." "Impossible!" Matheson cried. "He can't make ends meet on his salary as it is, and he has a wife and 2 kids." Daylight was upon him with a mighty oath. "Can't? Impossible? What in hell do you think I'm running? A home for feeble-minded? Feeding and dressing and wiping the little noses of a lot of idiots that can't take care of themselves? Not on your life. I'm hustling, and now's the time that everybody that works for me has got to hustle. I want no fair-weather birds holding down my office chairs or anything else. This is nasty weather, damn nasty weather, and they've got to buck into it, just like me. There are 10,000 men out of work in Oakland right now, and 60,000 more in San Francisco. Your nephew and everybody else on your payroll can do as I say right now or quit. Savvy? If any of them get stuck, You go around yourself and guarantee their credit with the butchers and grocers. And you trim down that payroll accordingly. I've been carrying a few thousand folks that'll have to carry themselves for a while now. That's all. You say this filter's got to be replaced? He told his chief of waterworks. We'll see about it. Let the people of Oakland drink mud for a change. It'll teach them to appreciate good water. Stop work at once. Get those men off the payroll. Cancel all orders for material. The contractors will sue. Let 'em sue and be damned. We'll be busted hiring a kite or on Easy Street before they can get judgment. And to Wilkinson, take off that owl boat. Let the public roar and come home early to its wife. And there's that last car that connects with the 12:45 boat at 22nd and Hastings. Cut it out. I can't run it for 2 or 3 passengers. Let them take an earlier boat home or walk. This is no time for philanthropy, and you might as well take off a few more cars in the rush hours. Let the strap hangers pay. It's the strap hangers that'll keep us from going under. And to another chief who broke down under the excessive strain of retrenchment, you say I can't do that and can't do this. I'll just show you a few of the latest patterns in the can and can't line. You'll be compelled to resign, all right. If you think so, I never saw a man that yet I was hard up for. And when any man thinks I can't get along without him, I just show him the latest pattern in that line of goods and give him his walking papers. And so he fought and drove and bullied and even wheedled his way along. It was fight, 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 and no let up from the first thing in the morning till nightfall. His private office saw throngs every day. All men came to see him or were ordered to come. Now it was an optimistic opinion on the panic, a funny story, a serious business talk, or a straight, take it or leave it blow from the shoulder. And there was nobody to relieve him. It was a case of drive, 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 and he alone could do the driving. And this went on day after day, while the whole business world rocked around him and house after house crashed to the ground. It's all right, old man, he told Hegan every morning, and it was the same cheerful word that he passed out all day long, except at such times when he was in the thick of fighting to have his will with persons and things. 8 o'clock saw him at his desk each morning. By 10 o'clock it was into the machine and away for a round of the banks. And usually in the machine with him was the 10,000 and more dollars that had been earned by his ferries and railways the day before. This was for the weakest spot in the financial dike. And with one bank president after another, similar scenes were enacted. They were paralyzed with fear, and first of all, he played his role of the big vital optimist. Times were improving. Of course they were. The signs were already in the air. All that anybody had to do was to sit tight a little longer and hold on. That was all. Money was already more active in the East. Look at the trading on Wall Street of the last 24 hours. That was the straw that showed the wind. Hadn't Ryan said so and so? And wasn't it reported that Morgan was preparing to do this and that? As for himself, weren't the street railway earnings increasing steadily? In spite of the panic, more and more people were coming to Oakland right along. Movements were already beginning in the real estate. He was dickering even then to sell over 1,000 of the suburban acres. Of course, it was at a sacrifice, but it would ease the strain on all of them and bolster up the faint-hearted. That was the trouble, the faint hearts. Had there been no faint hearts, there would have been no panic. There was that Eastern syndicate negotiating with him now to take the majority of the stock in the Sierra and Salvador Power Company off his hands. That showed confidence that better times were at hand. And if it was not cheery discourse, But prayer and entreaty, or showdown and fight on the part of the banks, Daylight had to counter in kind. If they could bully, he could bully. If the favor he asked were refused, it became the thing he demanded. And when it came down to raw and naked fighting, with the last veil of sentiment or illusion torn off, he could take their breaths away. But he knew, also, how and when to give in. When he saw the wall shaking and crumbling irretrievably at a particular place, he patched it up with sops of cash from his 3 cash-earning companies. If the banks went, he went too. It was a case of their having to hold out. If they smashed, and all the collateral they held of his was thrown on the chaotic market, it would be the end. And so it was, as the time passed, that on occasion his red motor car carried, in addition to the daily cash, the most gilt-edged securities he possessed, namely, the Ferry Company, United Water and Consolidated Railways. But he did this reluctantly, fighting inch by inch. As he told the president of the Merchants San Antonio, who made the plea of carrying so many others, "They're small fry. Let them smash. I'm the kingpin here. You've got more money to make out of me than them. Of course, you're carrying too much, and you've got to choose, that's all. It's root hog or die for you or them. I'm too strong to smash. You could only embarrass me and get yourself tangled up. Your way out is to let the small fry go, and I'll lend you a hand to do it." And it was Daylight also, in this time of financial anarchy, who sized up Simon Dolliver's affairs and lent the hand that sent that rival down in utter failure. The Golden Gate National was the keystone of Dolliver's strength, and to the president of that institution Daylight said, "Here I've been lending you a hand, and you now in the last ditch, with Dolliver riding on you and me all the time. It don't go, you hear me? It don't go. Dolliver couldn't cough up $11 to save you. Let him get off and walk, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you the railway nickels for 4 days. That's 40,000 cash. And on the 6th of the month, you can count on 20,000 more from the water company." He shrugged his shoulders. "Take it or leave it. Them's my terms. It's dog eat dog, and I ain't overlooking any meat that's floating around," Daylight proclaimed that afternoon to Hegan. And Simon Dolliver went the way of the unfortunate in the Great Panic who were caught with plenty of paper but no money. Daylight's shifts and devices were amazing. Nothing, however large or small, passed his keen sight unobserved. The strain he was under was terrific. He no longer ate lunch. The days were too short, and his noon hours and his office were as crowded as at any other time. By the end of the day he was exhausted, and, as never before, he sought relief behind his wall of alcoholic inhibition. Straight to his hotel he was driven, and straight to his rooms he went, where immediately was mixed for him the first of a series of double martinis. By dinner his brain was well clouded and the panic forgotten. By bedtime, with the assistance of Scotch whiskey, he was full, not violently or uproariously full, nor stupefied, but merely well under the influence of a pleasant and mild anesthetic. Next morning he awoke with parched lips and mouth, and with sensations of heaviness in his head, which quickly passed away. By 8 o'clock he was at his desk, buckled down to the fight. By 10 o'clock, on his personal rounds of the bank, and after that, without a moment's cessation till nightfall, he was handling the knotty tangles of industry, finance, and human nature that crowded upon him. And with nightfall it was back to the hotel, the double martinis, and the Scotch. And this was his program, day after day, until the days ran into weeks. End of Part 2, Chapter 20.